Ariel Thompson learned early how to disappear without leaving the room. In the mirrored corridors of Calder and Rowe, a prestigious consumer insight firm perched above the Chicago River, she moved like a quiet current, felt everywhere, seen nowhere. Her work shaped campaigns that made markets tilt and brands breathe again. Numbers listened to her. Patterns confessed to her. She could sense what people wanted before they found the words for it, the way a pianist hears the melody before the first note lands. Yet Ariel's office was not an office at all. It was a narrow glass enclosure tucked beside the server room, transparent enough to prove she existed, secluded enough to forget. Executives passed by without pausing. Clients never wandered that far. From her desk, she could see the river flash silver in the afternoon light, and sometimes she imagined it carrying her name downstream. Somewhere, it might be spoken aloud. At 31, she had mastered the art of soft excellence, brilliant, precise, restrained. She dressed in colors that soothed the eye. She spoke with careful warmth. She learned which ideas to release and which to hold back, how to shape a sentence so it could be lifted by someone else without resistance. When praise came, it came privately, like a secret she was expected to keep. Evan Caldwell, the firm's founder, liked to say Ariel was indispensable. He said it with a smile that suggested benevolence, the way one praises a finely tuned engine, admiring the power, uninterested in the face behind the wheel. In meetings, he translated her insights into vision. On stages, he wore her intelligence like a tailored jacket. The applause belonged to him. The work belonged to her. Ariel told herself this was how great things were made. Quietly, patiently, she told herself that love, for the craft, for the chase of truth hidden in data, was enough. That recognition was a vanity, and she had outgrown such needs. But late at night, when the building emptied, and the glass reflected only her own eyes, a softer question would rise. How long can a woman be essential and unseen before she begins to fade? On one such evening, as the city softened into dusk, Ariel saved a file and closed her laptop. The river below caught the last light and held it, briefly, like a promise. She stood, smoothed her sleeve, and looked through the glass, not at the world watching her, but at the world that wasn't. If you've ever felt that quiet ache, the sense of doing everything right and still being overlooked, stay with this story. A small sign of encouragement helps stories like this find the people who need them most. And your thoughts belong here as much as hers. Follow along. There is more waiting just beyond the glass. Evan Caldwell had a gift for saying exactly what a person wanted to hear without ever giving them what they needed. He would pause at Ariel's glass door in the early mornings, coffee in hand, tie perfectly aligned, and smile as if he had just remembered something important. Brilliant insight on the Hanley brief, he would say lightly. I don't know how you see these things before anyone else does. The words landed softly, like compliments wrapped in silk. Ariel always thanked him, always nodded, always returned to her screen with the faint warmth of being noticed, if only for a moment. Then he would walk away, already composing the version of the story he would tell upstairs. In conference rooms with walnut tables and filtered light, Evan spoke her ideas fluently. He described audience behavior with a confidence that sounded earned. He predicted cultural shifts with elegant certainty. Executives leaned forward, clients smiled, pens moved across notepads. And Ariel, seated behind the glass or absent entirely, listened to her own thinking echoed back to her, slightly altered, slightly polished, unmistakably his. Afterward, there would be another quiet visit. You should have seen their faces, Evan would say. They were completely sold. He never said you sold them. He never said her name. Performance reviews arrived like carefully written love letters that promised devotion while avoiding commitment. Evan praised her unique mind, her strategic intuition, her irreplaceable value. He spoke of timing, of structures, of how leadership required visibility, and visibility required readiness. Your moment is coming, he assured her. I just want to do this right. For you. Each year, the language evolved. The outcome did not. Ariel watched younger analysts, some with half her experience, move into client-facing roles. She trained them, refined their decks, corrected their assumptions. She taught them how to listen to data without forcing it to confess what it didn't mean. When they were promoted, they thanked Evan publicly and her privately. She told herself this was mentorship. She told herself it was temporary. Once, after a particularly successful quarter, she asked, carefully, what it would take to advance. Evan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, expression sympathetic. It's not about capability, he said. You have that in abundance. It's about fit, about perception. Clients expect a certain presence. The word lingered between them, unfinished. Ariel did not ask him to explain. She already understood more than she wanted to. Instead, she returned to her desk and opened a new project file, letting the familiar order of research calm her. Data did not judge. Patterns did not lie. They rewarded patience. They responded to care. But even numbers, she was learning, could be used to erase the hands that shaped them. Late one evening, long after the office lights dimmed, Ariel remained at her desk, refining a model she had built from scratch. The glass reflected her image back at her, composed, capable, quiet. She wondered how many times she had accepted praise as proof, how often she had mistaken kind words for real intention. Outside, the river moved steadily past the building, unconcerned with who took credit for its current. Ariel saved her work and shut down her screen. As she stood, a thought followed her, gentle but insistent, like a question learning how to speak. What if the praise was never meant to lead anywhere at all? She did not yet know that this question would soon demand an answer. The realization did not arrive all at once. It never does. It began as a faint disturbance, like a note slightly off-key in a familiar melody. Ariel noticed it on a Tuesday morning when Human Resources circulated a welcome email introducing 3 new senior consultants. Their photos appeared beneath their names, polished smiles, tailored suits, effortless confidence. Evan stood beside them in every image, one hand lightly placed on a shoulder, as if presenting a carefully curated collection. She scanned the email once, then again. All 3 were white. All 3 were younger than she was. All 3 had been hired directly into roles that required visibility. Client dinners, keynote presentations, press interviews. Roles she had been told again and again required readiness. At first, she dismissed the thought. Coincidence was always easier to believe than pattern. But patterns, once noticed, are relentless. Over the following weeks, Ariel began to see them everywhere. In meetings, Evan directed questions toward the new hires, even when the data came from her models. During brand photo shoots, she was asked, politely, almost apologetically, to step out of frame. Just for this round, the creative director said, we're going for a certain look. A certain look. The phrase echoed in her mind one afternoon as she stood near the edge of a conference room, laptop balanced against her hip. The firm was preparing materials for a high-profile pitch, and a photographer had been brought in to capture authentic moments of collaboration. Ariel watched as Evan arranged people instinctively who stood near him, who sat closest to the camera, who belonged at the center of the frame. When his eyes flicked toward her, they hesitated. Not long, just long enough. He gestured vaguely toward the back of the room. Ariel, you can stay there. We'll pull you in later if needed. She smiled. She always smiled. Later never came. That evening, as she packed her bag, she overheard a conversation drifting from Evan's office. The door was half open, his voice smooth and unguarded. Clients respond to relatability, he was saying. They need to see themselves reflected. It's not about talent, it's about comfort. Another voice laughed softly. Optics matter. Ariel froze. She did not hear her name spoken. She did not need to. For the first time, the truth sharpened into focus. This was not about timing, or structure, or readiness. It was about how she moved through the world in a body that did not reassure the people writing the checks. About being a Black woman in an industry that celebrated diversity in theory and sameness in practice. She returned to her glass office and sat down slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter something fragile inside her. Her reflection stared back, composed, intelligent, undeniably present. She wondered how many times she had adjusted herself to fit spaces that were never designed to hold her. Moments replayed themselves with new clarity, compliments followed by silence, praise without promotion, invitations that stopped just short of the stage. Each memory rearranged itself, no longer isolated incidents, but points on a single, unmistakable line. She had been told she was essential, but essential, she now understood, did not mean visible. As dusk settled over the river, Ariel closed her eyes and let the weight of the realization press in. It was painful, yes, but there was something else beneath it, a strange, unwelcome relief. Because once a pattern is seen, it cannot be unseen. And once a woman understands the rules she is truly being judged by, she must decide whether she will continue playing a game designed for her to lose. When Ariel opened her eyes again, the glass no longer felt transparent. It felt like a boundary, and for the first time, she wondered what it would take to step beyond it. The invitation arrived without ceremony. An email from Evan, sent just after midnight, its tone brisk and unadorned. We've secured the Aurora Health Collective pitch. National scale, high visibility. I'll need your full strategic support. Ariel read it twice, then a third time, her pulse quickening not with excitement, but with recognition. Aurora was no ordinary client. It was a wellness conglomerate preparing to expand into urban markets it had long misunderstood. Communities shaped by history, nuance, and distrust of polished promises. This was not a campaign that could be solved with surface aesthetics or borrowed language. It required listening. It required truth. It required her. She began the work the way she always did, quietly, thoroughly, with reverence for the lives behind the data. She studied patient behavior across neighborhoods the firm usually reduced to demographics. She traced patterns of care, hesitation, loyalty. She listened to interviews, read community forums, examined what people said when they believed no brand was watching. What emerged was not a strategy, but a story. Ariel built the campaign around trust, earned slowly, protected fiercely. She rejected glossy imagery in favor of lived moments. She wrote messaging that spoke with people, not at them. Every insight was anchored in empathy, every recommendation supported by evidence that breathed. Weeks passed. The office shifted around her, meetings, laughter, the quiet rearranging of power, but Ariel barely noticed. She was somewhere deeper, shaping something that felt dangerously close to honest. When the final deck was complete, she sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. The river outside moved steadily, indifferent to ambition. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine standing in the room when this was presented. Not behind glass, not in silence, but visible. The thought startled her. Then came the second email. Join the presentation, Evan wrote, in person. Ariel stared at the words, unsure whether to trust them. In 6 years, she had never been invited to the table when it mattered. She was the architect, not the voice. The engine, not the showroom. She replied with a single word. Of course. The morning of the pitch dawned, pale and cool. Ariel dressed with deliberate care, not to transform herself, but to remain herself. Clean lines, neutral tones, nothing that begged to be noticed, nothing that apologized either. As she stepped into the conference room, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the awareness of being the only Black woman in the space, the quiet calculations that came with it. Evans stood at the head of the table, radiant with confidence. He greeted her warmly, almost generously. "Big day," he said. "This could change everything." She wondered what he meant by everything. The clients arrived, the lights dimmed, the presentation began. Slide by slide, Ariel watched her thinking unfold on the screen. Her language, her logic, her care. Evan delivered it flawlessly. He paused where she had marked pauses, emphasized what she had underlined. He spoke of cultural sensitivity, of trust, of meeting people where they were, as if these ideas had been waiting inside him all along. The clients leaned in. Then came the question. A woman at the far end of the table, sharp-eyed, composed, looked up from her notes. "This is unusually nuanced," she said. "Who led the cultural research?" The room went still. For half a breath, Ariel believed this might be the moment when her name would be spoken aloud, attached at last to the work she had poured herself into. Evan smiled, effortless and assured. "We work very collaboratively here," he said. "It's a collective effort." The moment closed. Ariel felt it, not like a wound, but like a fracture finally completing itself. Something inside her shifted, quietly, irrevocably. As the presentation moved on and the clients nodded their approval, she understood with sudden clarity that this campaign would succeed. And that success would belong to everyone except her. The campaign that was changing everything had already done so, just not in the way she had hoped. The applause arrived softly at first, polite as a closing door. Then it gathered confidence, rippling around the table as the clients exchanged satisfied looks. Evan accepted the praise with practiced ease, nodding at the right moments, offering modest deflections that made him seem generous without surrendering an inch of ownership. Ariel sat still, hands folded, spine straight. From where she was, she could see the reflection of the slides in the polished surface of the table. Her charts, her words, her careful conclusions, mirrored and blurred, as if already drifting away from her. The lead client leaned back in her chair. "This approach is refreshing," she said. "It doesn't feel like marketing. It feels human." Evan smiled. "That was exactly our goal." The word landed with a quiet finality. As the meeting broke into smaller conversations, glasses of water clinked and chairs shifted. Evan stood, drifting naturally to the center of the room, the gravitational pull of authority drawing attention to him. Ariel remained seated, invisible in the gentle chaos that followed success. A junior associate leaned toward her, eyes bright. "That was incredible," he whispered. "I didn't know you could do that kind of work." Ariel returned his smile, measured and kind. Neither did anyone else, she thought, but did not say. She watched as Evan clasped hands, laughed easily, accepted congratulations that brushed past him like warm air. He spoke about his vision, his instinct, his belief in cultural understanding. Each sentence was familiar, shaped by rhythms she recognized intimately. It was like hearing her own voice, spoken through a body that the room trusted more. There was a moment, brief, almost accidental, when Evan's gaze found hers across the table. Something flickered there. Not guilt, not gratitude, calculation. The silent agreement that had governed them for years remained intact. She would continue to give, and he would continue to take. No scene, no disruption, no names spoken aloud. When the clients finally gathered their materials and rose to leave, the woman who had asked the question earlier paused beside Ariel's chair. Her eyes lingered, curious, searching. "You asked some thoughtful questions," she said. "It's rare." Ariel inclined her head. "Thank you." The woman smiled, as if she might say more, but Evan appeared at her side, seamless as a curtain drawn closed. "We'll follow up by end of week," he said warmly, already guiding her attention elsewhere. And just like that, the space for recognition vanished. After the room emptied, Ariel stayed behind. The lights hummed softly overhead. On the screen at the front of the room, the final slide remained frozen, building trust where it matters most. She stared at the words until they lost meaning. She should have felt proud. The campaign would roll out nationwide. It would change how people thought about wellness, about care, about belonging. That mattered. But something heavier pressed against her chest now. Something she could no longer explain away with patience or professionalism. This was not misunderstanding. This was not oversight. This was theft, carried out gently, with smiles and handshakes, and a language that made it sound like collaboration. She gathered her things slowly. Her laptop felt heavier than it had that morning. As she stood, her reflection caught in the darkened screen, calm, composed, unmistakably alone. In the hallway outside the conference room, Evan's laughter drifted toward her, buoyant and unconcerned. Ariel paused, letting the sound wash over her. For years, she had believed that being unseen was the price of doing meaningful work. Now, walking away from the room where her brilliance had been consumed and renamed, she understood something with painful clarity. It wasn't the price, it was the crime. And for the first time, she did not look back. Evan asked her to stay. The request came lightly, as if it were an afterthought, delivered while assistants gathered laptops and the last echo of celebration faded down the hall. Ariel watched the door close behind them, the room settling into a polished quiet that felt suddenly intimate, almost dangerous. Evan stood at the head of the table, jacket draped neatly over the chair. Without the audience, his confidence softened into something more careful. "You did great work today," he said. "Aurora is thrilled." Ariel waited. She had learned the rhythm of these conversations, the compliment that opened the door, the reassurance that led nowhere. "I wanted you to hear this from me directly," Evan continued, folding his hands. "We're restructuring leadership. It's time to put a face to the firm." He spoke the word face as if it were a neutral thing, a technical requirement, like bandwidth or budget. He named the promotions with an easy fluency, titles, responsibilities, visibility, names that were not hers. Ariel listened, the space between each sentence stretching thin. "And for you," Evan said at last, voice gentler now, "I'm adjusting your role, Senior Insight Lead. It reflects how critical your work is." She felt the phrase land and slide off her, weightless and empty. "Client-facing roles," he added, almost apologetically, "require a certain presence. This industry is, well, it's visual. Clients need to feel comfortable. Comfort, presence, visual." Ariel looked at him steadily. "Comfortable with what?" Evan hesitated, just long enough for the truth to gather itself. "Let's be honest," he said. "You're extraordinary, Ariel, but you're not the face anyone expects to see representing us. At conferences, in press, across a boardroom table." The words were careful. The meaning was not. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Ariel felt the blood rush to her ears, the polished calm she wore like armor beginning to fracture. She thought of the photographs she had been asked to step out of, the stages she had never been invited onto, the way presence had always been described as something she lacked, without anyone daring to say why. "You mean," she said quietly, "that I don't look like the idea of leadership you sell?" Evan exhaled, relieved by her precision. "It's not personal," he said quickly. "It's reality, and I'm trying to protect you from that." Protect. The word landed like a small, sharp laugh inside her chest. Protecting her, all these years, from being seen, from being named, from being allowed to stand where her work already lived. Outside, rain had begun to fall against the windows, soft at first, then steady, a rhythm that matched her breathing as she fought to keep it even. "So," Ariel said, rising from her chair, "I build the engine, and someone else gets to drive." Evans smiled, as if grateful she understood. "There's value in that," he said. "Real value." She nodded once. Not because she agreed, but because she finally heard him clearly. The sentence she had been waiting years to understand had at last been spoken aloud, stripped of euphemism and delay. "You're not the face." Ariel turned toward the window. The city beyond was blurred by rain, light stretching into long, uncertain lines. She felt something break, not loudly, not all at once, but with the quiet finality of a truth accepted. When she looked back at Evan, her voice was calm. "Thank you for your honesty." He seemed surprised by the steadiness of her tone, perhaps even relieved. Guilt flickered across his expression and vanished. "You're too valuable to lose," he said. "I hope you know that." She did know. That was the problem. Ariel left the room without another word. In the hallway, the firm hummed on, untouched by what had just been said. Laughter rose from somewhere. Glasses clinked. Success continued, indifferent to who paid for it. In the quiet of the restroom, she met her reflection again. Not the face they wanted, not the image they trusted, but a woman who had just been told, at last, what the rules truly were. And once learned, rules like these could never again be mistaken for guidance. They could only be challenged or left behind. The executive floor restroom was always empty. It was one of those quiet privileges the building never advertised. Marble counters, soft lighting, a vase of pale orchids that were replaced before they could wilt. Ariel stood there with her hands braced on the sink, staring at her reflection as though she had forgotten the language of her own face. The mirror did not flatter. It did not lie. It simply returned what was there. A black woman with steady eyes and a mouth held too carefully, as if even her expression had learned to negotiate for space. For a long moment, she did not move. She listened instead to the muffled cheer somewhere down the corridor, to the elevator bell, to her own breath, thin and controlled. It was the sound of someone who had spent years being careful not to take up too much. Evan's words still hung inside her like smoke. "You're not the face." Ariel had heard the sentence before in smaller ways, in compliments that came with invisible boundaries, in meetings where her ideas were praised, but her presence was treated as optional. In the casual note from a creative director, "We're going for a cleaner look on camera." In the way a client's eyes slid past her and settled on the nearest man in a suit, as if leadership were a reflection they expected to see. But hearing it said plainly, without apology, without shame, something in her turned over. Not anger yet, something colder. A clarity that made the world feel sharper around the edges. She leaned closer to the mirror, as if proximity could reveal a flaw she had missed. The truth was, she had been searching for flaws for years. She had trimmed her voice down to softness, her opinions to polite suggestions. She had learned when to laugh, when to nod, when to let silence protect her. She had practiced the art of being agreeable so perfectly that even she sometimes confused it with peace. And that was the cost. Not the title she never received. Not the salary frozen at next quarter. Not the office behind glass, tucked away like a secret the firm preferred to keep. The cost was the gradual surrender of her own shape. Memory came in fragments, uninvited. The first week at Calder and Rowe, when a colleague had called her articulate with a surprised smile, as if intelligence were an exception in her body. The client dinner where the waiter handed her the bill without looking twice, and Evan laughed gently and said, No, she's with us," like granting her membership. The time someone suggested she was too intense, and she responded by becoming smaller, softer, safer. Each moment had felt minor, almost ignorable on its own. But together they formed a blueprint of erosion. How a woman could be diminished without ever being openly attacked. Ariel's throat tightened. She blinked slowly, refusing tears, not because she believed crying was weakness, but because she did not want to give even the mirror the satisfaction of seeing her break. She pressed her fingertips to the counter, grounding herself in the cool stone. 6 years of building a kingdom that did not have a door for her. 6 years of telling herself that dignity meant endurance, that professionalism meant silence. 6 years of translating pain into patience and calling it maturity. It had not made her noble. It had made her convenient. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a bright, insistent vibration that cut through the quiet. Ariel did not reach for it yet. She stared at her reflection a moment longer, at the woman who had been trained to accept erasure as the price of belonging. Then she whispered, barely audible, the kind of truth that changes a life only after it is said aloud. "I did this too." Not that she deserved it, never that, but she had participated. She had smoothed the edges of injustice until it looked like normal business. She had swallowed her name and called it humility. She had given her brilliance away in pieces, waiting for someone else to declare it worthy of being seen. Her chest rose and fell, and with each breath something shifted. The mirror did not change, but her gaze did. It sharpened, steadied, warmed with a feeling that was not yet hope, but was no longer resignation. Ariel finally pulled out her phone. The screen lit her face from below, softening the shadows under her eyes. One new message, an unknown number. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, as if afraid the world might confirm what Evan had said, that she was not the face anyone wanted, not the story anyone would choose. Then she opened it, and the first line made her heartbeat change its rhythm, because the message did not begin with a dismissal. It began like this. Hi, Ariel. This is Marianne Keller. I hope this isn't too forward, but I need to speak to you privately. Ariel read the message twice, then again, as if repetition could turn disbelief into certainty. Hi, Ariel. This is Marianne Keller. I hope this isn't too forward, but I need to speak to you privately. I saw what happened in that room today. I'd like to buy you coffee tomorrow. I have a proposal. Marianne Keller was not a name that arrived casually. Ariel had studied Aurora Health Collective the way she studied everything, thoroughly, with an instinct for what the details were trying to confess. Marianne was the company's chief operating officer, known for rebuilding broken divisions and cutting partnerships without hesitation when trust was compromised. She had a reputation for elegance with teeth. People like that did not text people like Ariel, not without reason. Ariel's hands trembled slightly as she typed, "Tomorrow works. Where would you like to meet?" The reply came quickly, as if Marianne had been waiting, phone in hand. Wicker and Stone, Hyde Park, 10 o'clock, somewhere quiet. Please come alone. When Ariel slipped her phone back into her pocket, the restroom seemed different, less like an ornate hiding place, more like a corridor leading somewhere else. Her reflection still looked tired, but there was something new in her eyes now. A question not born of fear, but of possibility. The next morning, Chicago wore a pale winter sun like a reluctant smile. The wind cut cleanly between buildings, sharp enough to wake even the most disciplined doubt. Ariel arrived early, habits stitched into her bones by years of making sure she was never the inconvenience. Wicker and Stone was warm and dim, the kind of cafe that made time feel slower on purpose. Books lined one wall. The air smelled of espresso and cinnamon. People spoke in low voices, as if they'd agreed, without ever meeting, that this was a place for private decisions. Ariel chose a small table near the back, where the light softened rather than exposed. She ordered tea instead of coffee. She didn't trust caffeine with her nerves. At exactly 10 o'clock, Marianne Keller entered. She was taller than Ariel expected, wrapped in a camel coat that seemed to belong to a different climate and a different level of certainty. Her hair was swept back with a simplicity that looked effortless only because it was intentional. She scanned the room once, found Ariel immediately, and walked toward her with the calm of someone who never apologized for taking up space. "Ariel," Marianne said, and there was warmth in her voice. Not performative, not indulgent. Real. "Thank you for coming." Ariel stood and offered her hand. Marianne's grip was firm, steady, a silent language of respect. They sat. Marianne ordered black coffee, no sugar, no softness. For a moment she studied Ariel the way Ariel studied data, without cruelty, but without looking away. "I'm going to be direct," Marianne said. Ariel nodded. "Please." "I've worked with dozens of agencies," Marianne continued. "I've watched men like Evan Caldwell sell brilliance they don't possess. They're good at it. The room believes them because the room wants to." Ariel felt her throat tighten. She kept her face composed. "But yesterday," Marianne said, "I watched something else. I watched a man speak words he did not write and explain concepts he does not understand. And I watched you, your micro-reactions, the way your eyes moved ahead of the slide, as if you already knew where the story was going. The printed notes, the tiny corrections you almost made before you remembered you weren't supposed to speak." Ariel's cheeks warmed, the heat of being seen, truly seen. I contributed, Ariel said quietly, the old reflex rising like a shield. Modesty, safety, don't provoke. Marianne's expression softened, not with pity, but with insistence. You didn't contribute, she corrected. You created it. The words landed gently and still felt like impact. Ariel's fingers curled around her teacup, grounding herself. Why are you telling me this? Because Aurora hasn't signed yet, Marianne said simply, and because I will not enter a long-term partnership with a firm that treats integrity like a costume. Ariel stared at her, uncertain she had heard correctly. Marianne leaned forward, lowering her voice. I asked Evan who led the cultural research. He hid behind teamwork. That wasn't humility, that was strategy. And then I watched you disappear in your own meeting. The way you stayed quiet, it looked practiced. Ariel's breath caught. The truth of it stung, Marianne continued, her eyes steady. We are expanding into communities that do not forgive performance. If we build this campaign on stolen credit and polished optics, it will fail. Not immediately. Failure like that is slow. But it will fail where it matters. Ariel swallowed. So what do you want from me? Marianne held her gaze. I want the person who built that strategy. A silence opened between them, vast and humming. Then Marianne said it, the sentence that rearranged the air in Ariel's lungs. Leave Calder and Rowe. Build your own firm. Aurora will be your first client. Ariel's mind struggled for footing. The sensible part of her began listing obstacles automatically. No investors, no team, no legal structure, no brand identity, no office beyond glass walls and borrowed respect. I don't have infrastructure, Ariel said. I don't have... You have the only thing infrastructure is supposed to support, Marianne interrupted, not unkindly. You have ability. You have vision. The rest can be built. Ariel's heartbeat was loud in her ears. Why would you take that risk? Marianne's face softened, and for a moment her voice carried something personal. Because I've been in rooms where my ideas were called helpful, and then repeated by a man as brilliant, she said. Because I've watched talented women shrink themselves to survive. And because I refuse to reward a system that feeds on that shrinking. She sat back, letting the words settle. I'm not offering charity, Marianne added. I'm offering an exchange. Aurora gets the strategist we actually need. You get what you should have had all along. Ownership. Ariel stared down at her hands. They looked the same as yesterday, yet everything felt different. How much time do I have to decide? She asked, voice barely steady. Marianne's gaze did not flinch. 5 days, she said. I can hold the board back for 5 days. After that, they'll sign with Evan out of convenience, and you'll be back behind glass, watching someone else wear your work. Ariel inhaled slowly. 5 days was nothing and everything. 5 days to choose between safety and truth, between staying silent and being seen. Marianne reached into her bag and slid a plain envelope across the table. A draft contract, she said, not final, but real. So you know I mean what I'm saying. Ariel did not open it yet. She rested her fingertips on the paper and felt the weight of it. Thin, ordinary, impossibly heavy. Outside, the winter light shifted, brightening the street as if the city had decided to believe in morning after all. Ariel lifted her eyes to Marianne's, and for the first time in years, she did not hear a compliment meant to keep her quiet. She heard an offer that required her to become visible. Ariel carried the envelope home the way one carries a living thing, careful not to crush it, careful not to let it slip. The wind off the lake followed her down the sidewalk, tugging at her coat, sharpening every thought. By the time she reached her apartment, a modest one-bedroom with radiators that hissed like tired secrets, her hands were cold and her mind was burning. She set the envelope on the kitchen table and stared at it as if it might open on its own and spare her the responsibility of choice. 5 days. 5 days to decide whether to step out of the story she had been surviving and into one she would have to author. She made tea the way she always did when she needed steadiness. Water, heat, patience. a ritual built for women who had learned to soothe themselves quietly. Steam rose in delicate curls, fogging the window above the sink. Outside, Chicago moved on without her permission, lights flickering on across the skyline like distant signals. Ariel sat. She opened the envelope. The first page was clean, precise, unromantic. Scope of work, deliverables, timeline, payment schedule. Numbers followed, real numbers, not the polite fractions she had been trained to accept as reasonable. She read them once, then again, as if her eyes were wrong. Aurora would pay enough for her to breathe. Enough for an office that wasn't a glass afterthought. Enough to hire help. Enough to build a name that could not be erased with a smile. Her hands trembled, not from greed, from fear. Because money, real money, did not simply change a life. It changed what the world expected of you. It demanded proof. It demanded visibility. It demanded that she become the face Evan had told her she could never be. She set the contract down and pressed her fingertips to her temples. Her mind moved as it always did, fast, precise, merciless. If she left, she would lose the predictable safety of a paycheck, the illusion of belonging, the thin shelter of a company name. She would lose health insurance, predictable hours she didn't actually have, and the small comfort of knowing where the walls were. If she stayed, she would keep the same quiet injury, daily, cumulative, almost polite. She stood and paced the narrow living room, stepping around a stack of books and a folded throw blanket, her thoughts looping like a restless tide. She pictured Evan's office, the way he sat behind his desk as if the world had been built for his posture. She pictured the boardroom, the cameras, the curated faces. She pictured herself behind glass. A memory slipped in, unwanted, sharp. Her mother, standing in their small kitchen years ago, smoothing Ariel's hair with gentle fingers, saying softly, "Baby, you're going to have to be twice as good just to be treated half as fair." Ariel had believed her. She had lived it. But somewhere along the way, she had mistaken endurance for destiny. She returned to the kitchen and pulled out her laptop. If she was going to choose, she needed facts. Not because facts would eliminate fear, nothing could, but because facts could anchor her. She opened old project folders, campaign after campaign, deck after deck. She traced the line of her work through the firm like a hidden signature. She pulled revenue reports, renewal notices, press releases, award announcements that never included her name. By midnight, her table was covered in papers, in scribbled notes, numbers circled in black ink, dates underlined. She built a spreadsheet the way she built strategies, carefully, undeniably. The results made her stomach hollow. Over 6 years, the campaigns she had led, quietly, invisibly, had generated tens of millions for Calder and Rose clients. The Aurora pitch alone, if successful, would become the firm's most profitable contract in years. She had been the architect of their growth, the invisible spine holding up their public shine. And what had she received? A salary that looked respectable on paper and felt insulting in context. A title designed to keep her mid-level. Praise that never became proof. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion settling into her bones. Outside, the city had gone quieter. The radiator hissed. The clock above the stove blinked 1:17 a.m. Ariel closed her eyes and let herself imagine 2 versions of her future. In the first, she stayed. Evan apologized in careful phrases. He offered a raise that sounded generous until she compared it to what she had built. He promised visibility soon. She accepted because survival often masquerades as patience. Months passed. The new hires advanced. Her work continued to win. Her name continued to vanish. The glass remained. In the second, she left. She rented a small office. Nothing glamorous, just enough space to breathe. She bought a second chair for a future employee. She built a website with her name at the top. She walked into rooms with clients who looked at her and asked, without hesitation, "What do you think?" And then, the darker part of the imagination, the fear twisted it. What if they looked at her and saw what Evan said they would see? What if they decided she wasn't the face? What if she failed publicly, painfully, and proved every quiet doubt correct? Ariel opened her eyes. She realized, with a clarity that felt like stepping into cold water, that she was not simply afraid of failure. She was afraid of being seen trying. At Calder and Rowe, invisibility had been a kind of protection. If she was never the face, she could never be rejected as the face. She could pour herself into work and tell herself it was enough. But the truth was merciless. She was already being rejected, just quietly, just professionally, just with praise. Ariel reached for her phone and scrolled to Marianne Keller's number. Her thumb hovered, then stopped. Not yet. Not until she could say it without sounding like she wanted permission. She walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror again. Same face, same eyes, same woman. Only this time she did not ask whether she was the right image. She asked a different question, the one that had been circling her for years, waiting to become brave enough to speak. How much longer will I trade my life for someone else's comfort? The answer arrived not as a grand declaration, but as a quiet certainty settling into her chest. Ariel went back to the kitchen table. She pulled the contract toward her. She picked up a pen. Her hand shook, and she signed her name anyway. Morning arrived with no softness. Chicago's sky was the color of brushed steel, and the river below Calder and Rowe moved like a warning, steady, cold, indifferent to hesitation. Ariel stepped into the lobby at 6:40 a.m., earlier than usual, as if arriving before the building woke could spare her from being watched. The elevator carried her upward in silence. She could see her own reflection in the mirrored walls, composed, careful, almost serene. Only her hands betrayed her, fingers tightening around the slim folder tucked against her side. On the 32nd floor, the office was dim, its elegance muted without people in it. Desks lay quiet under their screens, and the glass corridor to Ariel's workspace looked less like transparency now and more like an aquarium. Beautiful, controlled, designed for observation. She did not go to her desk. She went straight to Evan's office. His door was closed, but light spilled from beneath it. Of course, he was already here. Evan Caldwell liked to perform devotion to work the way other men perform kindness, strategically. Ariel knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Evan looked up from his laptop, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before his expression rearranged into warmth. Ariel, he said, voice smooth with familiarity. You're in early. I needed to speak to you privately, she replied. Her tone was calm, almost gentle. It was the kind of calm that comes from deciding. Evan gestured to the chair across from him. Of course, sit. Ariel remained standing. It was a small rebellion, but it mattered. She wanted to feel her own spine in the room. I'm resigning, she said simply. Effective immediately. The words hung in the air, clear and unadorned. Evan blinked, as if language had failed him for a moment. What? He said, then quickly softened it. Ariel, if this is about yesterday, about what I said, I thought we reached an understanding. We did, Ariel replied. Her eyes did not leave his. I understand exactly how you see me, and I understand I can't build a life inside that vision. Evan stood, pushing his chair back with controlled impatience. You can't just quit. You're central to multiple accounts. Aurora, I've read my contract, Ariel interrupted quietly. I'm at will. No non-compete. No clause restricting me from starting my own firm. His jaw tightened. Something sharp flickered beneath his corporate polish. Starting your own firm, he repeated, as if tasting the idea. Is that what this is? Someone got in your head. Ariel did not flinch. I finally got into my own. Evan exhaled, forcing himself back into charm. All right, he said, voice coaxing. Let's talk like adults. What do you want? A raise? A title? We can fix this. He moved around the desk slightly, as if proximity could reassert authority. 20%, he offered quickly. 30% if I can justify it to the board. And you can sit in on client meetings more often. We can shift things. Ariel almost smiled, not from amusement, but from grief. How easily reality became flexible when his comfort was threatened. It's not only money, she said, it's credit, it's visibility, it's being treated like a person instead of a resource. Evan's eyes narrowed. I've always treated you well. You praised me, Ariel corrected, still calm. You didn't promote me. You didn't name me. You didn't protect my work from being absorbed into your image. His voice sharpened. I presented our work. That's leadership. You erased me, she said, and this time her voice carried the slightest crack, not weakness, but truth pressing through restraint. Systematically. And you convinced me it was professionalism to accept it. Evan's nostrils flared. He looked at her the way he had looked at her yesterday in the boardroom, measuring, weighing, deciding which version of himself would be most effective. You're making a mistake, he said. This industry is brutal. You think clients will trust you on your own? You think they want to buy from you? The last word landed carefully, like a blade positioned to look accidental. Ariel felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she held it down. That's the part you called protection, she said softly. Keeping me hidden so no one could test the truth. Evan stepped closer. I did protect you, he insisted. From being disappointed, from being rejected, from what you don't want to admit. Ariel breathed in slowly. The room smelled faintly of cologne and expensive leather, the scent of power that expected obedience. You told me I wasn't the face, she said, so I stopped trying to be yours. Evan's expression hardened. If you walk out that door, don't expect a recommendation. I'm not asking for one. Don't expect anyone in this industry to take your calls. Ariel's gaze stayed steady. They'll take calls when the results speak. His mouth tightened into something close to contempt. The mask slipped. Let me give you reality, Evan said coldly. You're not executive material. You're not the woman who gets the corner office. You're the woman who makes the coffee for the person in the corner office while doing all the work. For a moment, the words hit like a physical blow, acid against skin. Not because she believed him, but because he believed he was allowed to say it. Ariel's silence stretched, long enough for him to think he'd won. Then she spoke, quiet as winter light. You're right, she said. I'm not executive material for your company, but that says more about your standards than it does about my worth. She slid the resignation letter onto his desk. Her signature was neat, final. Evan stared at it as if it were an insult. Ariel turned toward the door, each step controlled, each movement deliberate. Her heart thundered, but her body carried her like a vow. She did not run. She did not apologize. She did not ask to be understood. In the hallway, the office was beginning to wake. Lights flickered on. A few early employees drifted in, laughing softly, coats still on, unaware that something had shifted in the building's unseen architecture. Ariel walked past the glass corridor that led to her small workspace. For years, she had worked behind it, like a secret. Now she passed it without stopping. She was not leaving because she was broken. She was leaving because she was done pretending the glass was air. Freedom did not arrive like sunlight. It arrived like cold air in the lungs, sharp, honest, startling in its emptiness. For the first 3 days after she left Calder and Rowe, Ariel moved through her apartment as if she were living inside an unfinished sentence. She woke too early, heart already braced for a commute that no longer existed. She brewed tea and stared at the steam, waiting for fear to fade into something prettier. It didn't. Fear stayed, but it changed shape. It became practical. On the 4th day, she signed a short-term lease for a small office in a shared workspace near the South Loop. The room was barely wide enough for 2 chairs and a desk, but it had one luxury she had never possessed before. A door that closed and belonged to her. Ariel hung nothing on the walls at first. She wanted to earn the right to decorate. Her first team was her laptop, a legal pad, and the quiet resolve that kept rising each time panic tried to take her throat. She filed incorporation papers, opened a business account, spoke to an attorney about liability and language and the invisible architecture of risk. She learned quickly what corporate life had protected her from. Every choice now belonged to her, and so did every consequence. On Friday afternoon, Marianne Keller called. Her voice was the same as in the cafe, steady, unornamented, decisive. "The board approved moving forward," she said. "We'll sign on Monday. Your company name will be on the contract." Ariel closed her eyes, absorbing the words the way one absorbs warmth after a long winter. Her company name. Not a department, not a team, not a firm that hid her behind a polished man. Just her. "Thank you," Ariel managed. "Don't thank me," Marianne replied. "Deliver." Ariel smiled then, small, private, fierce. She worked through the weekend, turning her original strategy into something executable. Timelines, creative direction, community partnerships, a listening plan that treated people like people rather than targets. She reached out to freelancers she trusted, designers, copywriters, a cultural strategist who understood that real nuance could not be faked. She built lean, careful not to imitate the bloat of agencies that confuse size with strength. Monday came, and with it, the signature. When Ariel opened the PDF and saw the line, "Ariel Thompson, founder," she felt her chest tighten. Not from nerves, but from a quiet grief she hadn't expected. This was what she should have had years ago. Proof. The Aurora campaign launched its first phase 6 weeks later. The response wasn't explosive the way marketing headlines like to describe success. It was better, steady trust, growing engagement, partnerships that felt earned instead of purchased. Clinics reported increased appointment bookings. Community pages shared Aurora's content without cynicism. Small signs of a larger shift. People recognizing themselves in a story that didn't flatter them into a stereotype. And then, inevitably, the world noticed. A trade newsletter mentioned Ariel's firm in a single line. "New boutique strategy studio wins Aurora Health account." That was all, but it was enough. 2 days later, an email arrived from the organizers of the Midwest Brand Summit, an event Ariel had attended for years, always as background. "We'd love to invite you to join our panel on cultural relevance in modern brand strategy." Ariel stared at the words, feeling something loosen in her chest. A panel, a stage, a microphone with her name attached to it. She replied yes within 30 seconds, before her doubt could draft an excuse. The next morning, another email arrived. The subject line was painfully polite. "Update regarding panel participation." The message was shorter than the invitation, colder in tone. "Due to scheduling adjustments and sponsor considerations, we've had to restructure the panel. Your participation is no longer required. We hope you'll still attend as a guest." Ariel read it twice, the way she had read Marianne's text in the restroom. Disbelief first, then recognition. Sponsor considerations. She called the event coordinator, a woman named Elise, whose voice sounded strained before Ariel even spoke. "Elise," Ariel said calmly, "I received the update. What happened?" A pause. A breath held too long. "I'm so sorry," Elise said finally. "This isn't fair." "Just tell me," Ariel replied, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. Another pause. Then Elise lowered her voice as if the walls could report her. "Calder and Rowe is one of our top sponsors. Evan Caldwell sits on the advisory circle. He expressed concerns. He said your presence would create conflict." Ariel's fingers tightened around the phone. Conflict. The word men used when women stopped being quiet. "So he asked you to remove me," Ariel said. "Yes," Elise admitted. "And the board wouldn't risk losing funding." Ariel closed her eyes. She could see it with painful clarity. Evan's smile, his practiced disappointment, the gentle insistence that he was simply protecting the industry from discomfort. Her visibility had become a problem to be managed. She thanked Elise and ended the call. For a few minutes, she sat alone in her small office, the hum of the building filling the silence. A city siren wailed somewhere outside, distant and indifferent. She stared at the plain wall she hadn't decorated yet, and the truth settled over her like a second skin. Evan wasn't ignoring her anymore. He was watching. And watching was only the beginning. A soft knock came at her door. One of the freelancers she'd hired, Nina, a designer with bright eyes and a blunt kindness, stood there holding a laptop. "I heard," Nina said gently, "about the panel." Ariel turned from the wall. Her expression had changed, sharpened into something quiet and unyielding. "Good," Ariel said. Nina blinked. "Good?" Ariel nodded once. Her voice was calm, but underneath it ran a current that felt new. Dangerous not because it was loud, but because it was awake. "He wants me invisible," Ariel said softly. "That means he's afraid I'll be seen." She stepped closer to her desk, opened a folder, and pulled out a stack of printed documents she had been gathering without quite admitting why. Dated drafts, email threads, version histories. Proof that her work had not been borrowed. It had been built. Ariel's gaze lifted to Nina, steady as a vow. "Let him watch," she said. "I'm going to build anyway." And in the quiet of that small room, bare walls, borrowed desk, one door that finally belonged to her, Ariel understood the strange, sacred truth of becoming visible. You don't just step into the light. You learn to withstand the eyes that come with it. Ariel had never wanted a war. She had wanted what most people wanted: work that mattered, respect that was honest, a life built without bargaining away pieces of herself. She had believed once that if she kept her head down and let the results speak, the world would eventually turn its face toward her. But the world did not turn on fairness. It turned on power. And power, Evan Caldwell had taught her, could be quiet. It could arrive in polite emails and sponsor considerations. It could remove a woman from a stage without ever admitting fear. For 3 days after the call with Elise, Ariel tried to do what Marianne had advised. Keep building. Ignore the noise. Let success become its own defense. She returned to the Aurora launch schedule, answered client questions, refined creative briefs. She told herself she could outwork the shadows. Then another door closed. A boutique university invited her to guest lecture in their marketing program. The invitation arrived glowing with admiration, signed by a department chair who wrote, "Your approach is the future." 2 days later, the event was postponed indefinitely. Then a trade association withdrew her nomination for an Emerging Leader Award. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet disappearance, as if her name had been erased from the list by an invisible hand. Ariel began to understand the pattern of retaliation. Evan wasn't trying to defeat her work. He was trying to starve her visibility. In the evenings, when the shared workspace emptied and the city outside softened into winter darkness, Ariel sat alone at her desk and opened the folder she had been building since her last day at Calder and Rowe. It was not an archive of anger. It was an archive of truth. Emails where Evan forwarded her work to clients with his name attached. Slide decks with version histories proving authorship. Internal notes praising Ariel's methodology, while promotions went elsewhere. A trail of evidence so clear it felt almost obscene that it had ever been deniable. She scrolled through it slowly, hands steady, heart not. It was strange how proof could feel like grief. Each timestamp was a moment she had lived, a day she had chosen silence, a place she had stayed too long. The documents did not just expose Evan, they exposed what she had endured. Ariel closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, staring at the bare wall. She had tried to be polite about her own erasure. She had tried to exit cleanly, quietly, as if leaving without truth would keep the peace. But peace, she realized, was not what Evan offered. He offered quiet, and quiet was a cage. The next morning, Ariel did something she had never done before. She reached out, not to friends for comfort, not to mentors for advice, to journalists. She started with a woman named Tessa Lynn, a reporter who covered workplace power and corporate culture with the kind of precision that left no room for spin. Ariel had admired her articles for years in private, never imagining her own life might become one of them. She drafted an email and deleted it twice before she sent the third version. It was concise, measured, professional. I'm not interested in a hit piece. I'm interested in the record being accurate. Tessa responded within hours. I'm listening, but if we do this, we do it carefully. Facts, corroboration, documentation. Are you prepared for that? Ariel stared at the question, feeling the weight of what it truly asked. Are you prepared to be seen? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought of Evan's voice. You're not the face. She thought of the panel invitation withdrawn, of doors closing in silence, of the way conflict had become the word used to punish her for existing outside his control. Then she typed, yes. Over the next 10 days, Ariel lived two lives at once. By day, she built Aurora's campaign with disciplined focus. She delivered what Marianne demanded, results. Every meeting, every memo, every decision was clean, defensible, undeniable. By night, she assembled the truth into a narrative that did not beg for sympathy and did not indulge revenge. She did not call Evan a monster. She did not write about his smile or his suits. She wrote about outcomes, patterns, systems, how credit was redirected like a river rerouted by quiet hands. Tessa interviewed former Calder and Rowe employees, analysts and assistants and freelancers who had watched Ariel's work become someone else's prestige. Some spoke anonymously, afraid of the industry's small, vindictive memory. Others used their names, tired of living like ghosts. Ariel provided documents and let them speak. Her discipline surprised even her. In another life, she might have wanted to scream. In this one, she chose something sharper. She chose restraint. Restraint was not weakness. It was strategy. When the article finally ran, it did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived like a door opened in a room where the air had been held too long. The woman behind the data. How a strategist built a firm's success and was erased from it. The piece was thorough. It laid out timelines. It quoted former colleagues. It included screenshots of version histories, careful enough to protect client confidentiality while proving authorship. It framed Ariel's story not as gossip, but as a case study in how industries manufacture leadership by laundering credit through faces people already trust. It also included one line that made Ariel's throat tighten when she read it. Visibility is not a reward, it is a right, and some systems are designed to deny it. Within hours, the story spread. Not everywhere, not to everyone, but to the people who mattered, the ones who booked panels, ran associations, signed checks, and shaped reputations. Emails began appearing in Ariel's inbox. Some were quiet apologies. I didn't know. Some were confessions. I've seen this happen. I didn't stop it. Some were cruel, as predictable as rain. Why are you bitter? Why now? Ariel read them all and felt, beneath the tremor of nerves, an unfamiliar steadiness. For the first time, Evan could not control the narrative with a sponsor check and a polite phone call. Truth had stepped into the room. And truth, once made public, had its own kind of power. It did not ask permission. It did not soften itself. It simply became harder to silence. Ariel sat at her desk long after midnight, the city outside glowing with winter lights. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't yet have the courage to open. She rested her palm on the surface of the desk, feeling its solidity, grounding herself in something real. She had turned her truth into a weapon, not because she loved violence, but because she loved her life. And she was done letting anyone take it from her quietly. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning, disguised as formality. Ariel was reviewing community feedback from Aurora's latest rollout when her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She answered without hesitation, the way she had learned to answer everything lately, directly, without flinching. Ariel Thompson, a man asked, voice precise, practiced. This is Marcus Hale. I'm your attorney. Her breath caught, sharp and sudden. We have a situation, Marcus continued, not unkindly. Calder and Rowe has filed a civil suit against you and your firm. The words settled slowly, like snow accumulating on an already heavy branch. On what grounds? She did not ask it aloud. She already knew. Breach of fiduciary duty, Marcus said. Theft of proprietary methodologies. tortious interference with business relationships. It's comprehensive, aggressive. It was Evan's voice she heard in the language, smooth, authoritative, laced with a righteousness that dared the world to contradict him. Ariel thanked Marcus and ended the call. For a moment she sat perfectly still, hands resting on the desk, the hum of the building pressing in around her. Outside, a siren passed, then faded. Life continued, unaware that a line had been crossed. She opened the lawsuit. The document was thick with accusation and implication. Phrases like misappropriation, confidential frameworks, irreparable harm. Her name appeared again and again, stitched into sentences designed to make her look reckless, disloyal, predatory. The irony almost made her laugh. For years, Evan had treated her work as communal property, fluid enough to present as his own, invisible enough to deny her ownership. Now suddenly it was sacred. Suddenly, it belonged to him. The first email arrived before she finished reading. Ariel, given the recent legal developments, we're going to pause contract discussions until things settle. Then another. Our board is concerned about reputational risk. Then another. We support women in leadership, but this situation feels complicated. Complicated. The word that meant inconvenient when courage was required. By noon, 3 prospective clients had stepped back. One existing partner asked for an urgent meeting to discuss stability. Ariel felt the floor tilt beneath her, not collapse but sway, enough to make her reach instinctively for balance. She closed her office door. For 30 minutes, she allowed herself to feel it all. The fear, the anger, the exhaustion that had been waiting patiently for permission. She paced the small room, pressed her palms to her eyes, let a single tear fall without apology. Not because she doubted herself, but because the cost of being right was heavier than she had imagined. What if Evan won by attrition? What if the lawsuit did what it was designed to do? Not prove anything, but poison the air long enough for her momentum to stall. The thought was sharp enough to hurt. Then the timer on her phone chimed softly. 30 minutes. Ariel straightened. She washed her face, cooled her skin with water, looked at herself in the mirror without accusation. Her reflection looked tired, but it also looked awake. She called Marcus back. We fight, she said simply. Marcus exhaled. Good, because their case is weak. He explained carefully. Evan's employment contracts with her lacked IP protections. The methodologies he claimed as proprietary had been developed by Ariel independently, documented, versioned, time-stamped. Some were even registered under her name before she left the firm. The lawsuit was not about truth. It was about pressure. They're betting you'll fold, Marcus said, that clients will panic, that you'll settle quietly. Ariel closed her eyes, imagining Evan's satisfaction if she did. No, she said, we don't settle. The next call was to Marianne Keller. I've seen the filing, Marianne said before Ariel could speak. Aurora is not going anywhere. Relief loosened something deep in Ariel's chest. My legal team is on standby, Marianne continued. If you need resources, you have them. But I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Ask. Are you prepared for this to get worse before it gets better? Ariel thought of the panel she'd lost, the article she'd allowed into the world, the doors that had closed and the ones that had opened. She thought of the glass office and the moment she'd stepped past it. I don't know if I'm prepared, she said, but I'm not going back. Marianne's voice softened. Good, because men like Evan only stop when they realize fear no longer works. That afternoon, Evan released a statement. Protecting intellectual property is fundamental to our industry. When individuals violate trust, we are obligated to act. The comments flooded in. Some defended him. Others questioned the timing. A few saw through the veneer entirely and called it what it was: retaliation. Ariel did not respond. She focused on what she could control. She met with her team and told them the truth, without drama. She reassured clients with clarity and documentation. She continued delivering work that made doubt harder to sustain. Late that night, alone in her office, Ariel opened her laptop and reread the article that had started this cascade. She read it not with pride, but with resolve. Evan had chosen escalation. He had chosen to make her survival expensive. But he had miscalculated one thing. He believed fear would send her back into silence. Instead, it had done the opposite. It had stripped away her last illusion. Ariel closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as the city breathed around her. If this was the cost of visibility, she would pay it. And she would make sure the receipt was public. The invitation arrived the way mercy sometimes does. Unexpected, undeserved, and impossible to ignore. 3 weeks after the lawsuit became public, the Midwest Brand Summit announced a vacancy. Their keynote speaker had withdrawn, citing unforeseen conflicts. The irony was not lost on anyone who knew the industry's quiet weather. What followed was a single email to Ariel, brief and careful, as if the words themselves feared consequence. If you are willing, the stage is yours. Ariel read it in the late afternoon, the sun leaning low against the windows of her office, turning dust into gold. She felt the familiar tightening, fear, yes, but beneath it something steadier, a resolve that had learned to breathe alongside doubt. She said yes. The days that followed were a narrowing of the world. Ariel worked with a discipline that bordered on devotion, not to craft an argument, not to build a defense, but to tell a truth that would not collapse under scrutiny. She refused the temptation to speak Evan's name. She refused the seduction of bitterness. This would not be a trial. It would be a reckoning of a different kind. On the morning of the summit, Chicago woke to a clear blue sky, the kind that arrives only when something is about to change. The convention hall hummed with anticipation. 1,200 seats, journalists lining the aisles, industry leaders settling into their certainty. Somewhere among them sat Evan Caldwell. Ariel did not look for him. Backstage, she stood alone, palms resting against the cool metal of a railing, listening to the applause fade from the previous panel. Her name echoed through the hall in the announcer's voice. Founder and principal strategist, Ariel Thompson. And for a moment she felt the weight of it. Not pride, responsibility. She stepped into the light. The applause that greeted her was polite, measured, tinged with curiosity and doubt. She let it rise and fall without rushing it, standing at the center of the stage as if she belonged there, which, she realized, she did. 5 years ago, Ariel began, her voice calm and unadorned. I worked in an office the size of a storage room and built a strategy that generated millions in revenue. The room stilled. My name was not on the work. I was praised privately and erased publicly. And I accepted that erasure because I had been taught to confuse silence with professionalism. She paused, allowing the words to find their place. I was told I wasn't the right face, not the image clients expected, not the presence leadership trusted. And I believed it, until I realized that invisibility wasn't humility, it was a system. She spoke of data and stories, of communities reduced to demographics, of brilliance redirected through bodies deemed more acceptable. She spoke of leaving without permission, of building without protection, of the fear that comes when the quiet ends and the watching begins. I am not here to ask for sympathy, she said, her gaze steady as it moved across the audience. I am here to talk about visibility, who gets it, who doesn't, and why. Pens moved, phones lifted, the air changed. When I became visible, Ariel continued, I was told I was disruptive, that my presence created conflict. But conflict is not created when truth appears. Conflict is revealed. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform anger. She let the truth do the work. I learned something building my firm, she said. Success does not come from fitting an image. It comes from becoming undeniable. And you become undeniable by doing work that cannot be separated from your name. A ripple moved through the room. Recognition. Not agreement yet, but something closer to awakening. I am standing here not because I am fearless, Ariel said softly. I am standing here because I decided fear would no longer be my employer. Silence followed. Deep. Complete. Then the applause began. Not polite this time. Not careful. It rose in waves, filling the hall, carrying her words into places she could not follow. People stood, some wiped their eyes. Others nodded, as if something inside them had finally been named. Ariel stepped back from the microphone, heart pounding, breath unsteady. She did not bow. She did not smile. She simply stood there, visible, unhidden, unashamed. In the third row, Evan Caldwell sat perfectly still. Ariel did not look at him. She had already rewritten the narrative, and this time, the story belonged to her. Visibility, Ariel learned, does not arrive with permission. It arrives when the world has no choice but to look. In the weeks after the summit, the lawsuit began to unravel. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way fragile things always do when exposed to daylight. Motions were filed. Claims were questioned. Dates and authorship refused to bend to intimidation. Evan's certainty thinned into silence, then into carefully worded statements that said everything and meant nothing. The industry noticed. Clients returned, not all at once, not with fanfare, but with intention. New ones followed, drawn not by spectacle, but by trust. Ariel's firm grew slowly, deliberately, each hire chosen not for polish, but for integrity. Her office walls filled with work that carried names, credit placed where it belonged, brilliance allowed to stand without disguise. She no longer worked behind glass. She worked in rooms where her voice shaped decisions, where her presence did not need translation. Sometimes, late in the evening, Ariel would walk home along the river, coat pulled close, city lights trembling across the water. She would think of the woman she had been, the one who stayed quiet because quiet felt safer than refusal. She did not judge that woman. She honored her. Survival had required patience before it allowed courage. And sometimes she felt something unexpected toward Evan Caldwell. Not anger, not triumph, but distance. He had become small, not because she had defeated him, but because she had stepped beyond the frame where he mattered. The final article appeared months later, long after the noise had settled. It did not name him. It did not need to. It spoke of systems, of power, of women whose work had been siphoned into other people's legacies. Ariel was quoted only once. "I didn't win by being louder," she said. "I won by refusing to disappear." That sentence traveled farther than she ever could have. Letters arrived. Messages from women in offices, in labs, in classrooms, in kitchens. Women who had been told to wait, to be grateful, to let others speak for them. Ariel read every word, answered when she could, held the weight of being seen with care. Visibility, she knew now, was not an ending. It was a responsibility. On a quiet Sunday morning, Ariel opened a blank document and began to write. Not a memoir, not a manifesto, but a guide. Something practical, something honest. A way out for women still standing behind glass. She titled it, simply, Unavoidable, because that was what she had become. Not because she had changed who she was, but because she had finally allowed the world to see her as she had always been. If this story moved you, if you recognize yourself in Ariel's silence, her fear, or her courage, let that recognition mean something. Like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel for more stories about women who refuse to disappear. Some stories are meant to be watched. Others are meant to wake you up. This one was both.